Cool, refreshing water splashed against her face. Her mind finally escaped from the hazy fog that surrounded it. The fire had been burned the monster into nothing more than a pile of ash, leaving behind a burnt hole in the fence. It had been pressed up against. With the path clear, she had managed to wander away through the darkness, all the way to the park. And that's how Octavia found herself on the shore of Ponyville's Crystal Lake. She dipped her hooves in the cool water again, enjoying it just how much it helped her relax. Another splash to her face, and she felt her faculties returning to her. There was a dull ache spreading throughout her body that she could feel the bruise coming from under her coat. She hadn't that lost much blood. Her injuries had mostly had cuts where her skin had split open from the impacts. But they had since closed up on their own. With the help of the lake water, she was able to wash off that every blood she could see. Everything was still completely pitch black, and her lantern did a poor job of illuminating anything not within 5 feet of her. At least she knew that she was at the park, and the only that was that she passed by a sign saying as much as on her way in. From there, her hooves guided on self and instinct to the lake. It seemed that she still had some memories of Ponyville's layout from all those years ago. So now I just need to find some place that would be opened with a key, she murmured, reaching into her saddlebag to grab hold of the map. She grabbed the first paper-like thing in their hooves, touched and pulled it out. Octavia then stared at Balamina's letter. Having it pulled out by mistake, she gently held her letter in both her hooves, staring at through it. She had thought that she'd come to Ponyville to surprise because of this letter, because of some long-distant hope that perhaps Balamina was somewhere in this town. She had come in search of her sister that had been dead for many, many years. It was impossible to have her to be alive. And yet she couldn't deny that letter she was holding. It was exactly the kind of letter Balamina would have sent her, in her exact hoof writing, this exact style, and no one but those who had lived on Rock Farm would have known about the nickname Blinky. Are you really here, Balamina? Somewhere in Celestia Forsaken Town? Octavia whispered to herself. Her emotions were welling in her throat. She knew that her sister had to be dead, and her grave sat back at the farm, same as it always had been. Pinky had to know something about the letter. Octavia was sure of it. But if she did, what would have even that be mean? Was Balamina actually still alive and Pinky was hiding that fact? Would her sister really have hidden something important from her? I had forgotten about her because I didn't want to remember. That's why I have a terrible thing for an older sister to do. So from now on, I promised to visit her once a year. Pinky's voice echoed in her mind. It had only been a few months since that day, when Pinky had appeared suddenly and whisked her back to the farm to see her sister. Pinky was certain that Balamina was dead too, which meant that there was no way of really her hiding the fact. Putting the letter away, she actually pulled out the map this time, and checked immediately at the area. She was quickly able to discern where Crystal Lake was on the map, as well as the road that she had taken to get there. Here, she pointed at the building, sat next to the left of the lake. Crystal Shores Resort is the only building in the park, so there must be a letter referring to it. To her destination confirmed, she put the map away and made her way inside to look at the other side of the lake. Crystal Shore Lake just had a few rests of the town. It had seen better days. What had been a nice hotel was now run down and falling apart. The floorboards noisily creaked as Octavia walked up to the front door, making her wonder if she was even strong enough to support her anymore. But with the hotel being the only place in the park that would realistically need a key, and a good meeting place to the letters had suggested, she pushed open the front door and had entered the decrepit building. She was met with the stale, musky air that entered through. That wasn't the surprising part. Several lanterns had been lit around the lobby hotel, illuminated the immediate area. There was a faded red rug lying in the middle, while broken, tossed-aside lobby chairs lined the edges of the room. She could see the check-in counter on the end, and looking up, could see the second floor on the balcony, led deeper to the hotel. "Oh, there you are!" A familiar filly's voice spoke up from above annoyance. "Ellie?" Octavia cried out in surprise, seeing that the dark gray filly sitting on the balcony. She was looking down at her for the poles of the railing. "Oh, thanks, Celestia, you're okay. I thought something must have happened to you." Yeah, right. Like I believe that. The filly rolled her eyes. You didn't even try to find me. You just left me alone and went off to do, I don't know, boring adult stuff. The filly huffed, turning her head away. Ellie, listen to me. It's not safe here. The town is crawling with monsters, and you need to get out of this town as soon as possible. Octavia's voice grew desperate, fearing for the child's safety. Oh yeah? Well, if it's so dangerous out here, why are you still here? Ellie asked defiantly. Octavia paused, not having expected her question. Her ears fell flat as she lowered her head, realizing that she did have the option to leave, and that she almost taken it. But at the end she had stayed, and she had put most of herself in danger and got hurt for it. So why was that she was staying? I'm looking for my sisters. Octavia then looked back up, her voice growing more somber. They're in this town somewhere, and I can't leave without them. One would be a young mare, just becoming an adult, and an ash-colored mane with a blue-gray coat named Bellamina Pie, and another mare covered head to hoof with pink named Pinkie Pie. Have you seen them? I can't say who Bellamina is, but someone in this town knows Pinkie Pie. I haven't really seen her today, though. Ellie shrugged while standing up, starting to walk along the balcony. But the town was in so much danger. Why would they still be here? The facts just don't act up. She then stopped and turned to Octavia, pointing down at her. The only conclusion I have come to is that you're a weirdo. Ellie, this is serious. Octavia stomped her hoof, getting frustrated at the filly's dismissive attitude. I have to find my sisters. They're too important for me, and to just leave them. But you need to get out of here. Your family must be worried about you. Please, you have to escape before it's too late. Let me think about it. Ellie then spoke up in an annoying, childish way as she tapped her hoof to the chin. Tell you what, I'll think about leaving, but only if you catch me. Ellie childishly giggled, running off into the darkness and the upper floors of the hallway. Ellie! Octavia cried out again, unable to stop the foal from running off on her own. Damn it to Celestia! This isn't a game! She yelled out into the darkness, only hearing the faint echo of her voice before everything fell silent again. Her teeth ground in anger, letting out a growl of frustration before slamming her hooves down against the ground. She took several deep breaths, forcing herself to calm down. That girl is going to get herself killed, and there is nothing I am going to be able to do anything about it. She muttered bitterly under her breath, and she had come here to search for clues on Pinkie Pie's whereabouts. But now she had to turn hunting down troublesome foal that is in onto the list. Now with Ellie gone, she looked around everything in the room once more, getting her bearings to where she was. Around her, she could spot 4 hallways. Around the room once more, getting her bearings for where he was. Around her she could spot 4 hallways. Though 3 of them had long since caved in, they were no longer accessible, and the other hallway looked like it was open, but it led further into the hotel, likely to where the rooms are kept. Just behind the service desk, however, there was a door that looked incredibly out of place in the room. Octavia stepped closer to check on the desk, to get a better look at it, before blinking in surprise. It was ornate, brick red stone door. Through there was no handle was visible. Instead, the center of the door was a large clock that had several orbs drawn around it. They appeared to be 3 suns, 1 red, 1 yellow, 1 blue. 3 moons, 1 white, 1 green, and 1 red. Each of the side of the clock was a picture of a Princess Celestia and Princess Luna respectively. The princesses were drawn out of their bodies, encircling a hole on each side with something that could be placed. Well, I can just tell by looking at this door that is quite locked. Octavia then pulled back from the desk, and no visible keyholes, so the silver key doesn't open it. I'll just move on. The hallway had collapsed and looked fairly normal, save for the layer of dust that caked onto everything. A shallow green carpeting lined the floor against the half-beige, half-green walls, turning the corner to lead to a pitch-black hallway that caused her to pull her lantern back in order to see. Hotel rooms were laid out on each side of the hall, with an odd-numbered rooms staring at her left and right, and even the rooms stared at her right. This first door she checked had a broken lock on it, and the door jiggling noisily as she tried the handle. While annoying, it was at least told her that nothing could be the same or in or out of the door, which meant anything she was doing wasn't inside. The first door that opened was room 103, which opened to a quiet creak. She braced herself for anything that might jump out to her, but the only thing that greeted her was a fairly normal hotel room. It had a bathroom by the front door, two beds in the middle, and a closed curtain all covering the large window. Stepping further, several more details became apparent. The beds were still displaced and ruffled from the pillows, tossed around the room without a care. Several stains lined the sheets, floor, and even the walls, though she couldn't immediately tell what the stains were from. Given how unclean she knew that the hotel rooms could be, though, she didn't want to even shudder a guess at the most surprising thing that stood out was a small pile of bits that sat on the bedside table. Walking up to the table, she examined the bits curiously. They were just sitting there, as if they'd been left as payment for something that no one had collected. For a reason she couldn't explain. The bits made her feel incredibly uncomfortable, going at the pit of her stomach. Money was money, though, and she figured that it was possible she might need them at some point. She picked up the small amount of bits and put them into her saddlebag. Underneath the pile was a currently torn piece of paper that had something written on it. Who will be born again tonight? Who will be born again tonight? It was clearly at the bottom of the portion of the postcard that she could clearly see that had more text that had been written where the paper that had been torn apart. Looks like another riddle, though, only a portion of it. She spoke to herself, flipping the card around and seeing the part of the lake on the other side. If it's like the other one, it'll probably help me open some door I need to get through. I guess I'll hold on to it just in case. I'll find the other pieces then. With the bits and paper tucked away, she couldn't see anything else used in the room, so she made her way back out into the hall. The next room that opened for her was room 106, leading to whose room was laid out pretty much like the same as room 103's, but minus the window. In this room, the beds were completely different from the last one. One bed was just stripped there, leaving nothing but a mattress in the frame. The other still had sheets and pillows, but cotton and fluff had been tossed everywhere in the room, as the bed had been wildly, viciously stabbed with a bladed weapon. Deep gashes were visible across the bed and the bed sheets that had been reduced to rags. Whoever had last been in this room had destroyed the bed for some reason. The sight was disconcerting to her. Without the attendant's eye, she was at least somewhat at ease. Stepping further into the room, she decided to check out the bedside table to see if this one had clues. On the table was a gemstone, one that looked like it out of place in the destroyed room. It was beautifully crafted green gem in the shape of an eye. It was ornate and regal, as if it belonged to royalty, and it was just sitting there in the middle of the filthy hotel bedroom. "How did you get in here?" Octavia murmured, picking up the gem and examining it in the light. Just looking at it was a little unsettling, as the gemstone was like staring directly into her soul. With that creepy thought pushed out of her head, she gently placed it in her saddlebag with the other items. She had turned to find the other torn piece of paper that had been hiding underneath the gem. "Cleanse the sinful and make them anew." It was another piece of the postcard, though this one didn't evenly line up with the other parts she had. That meant, at the very least, there was a part between them, and that part was just above this piece, so she still had to find at least two more pieces of the riddle. With everything of value found in the room, she quickly made her way back out to the decrepit halls of Crystal Shores Resort. She only now checked every room in the hallway and was now ready to move on to the next. Her progress was blocked, however, by several large, thick metal poles that had been erected at the intersection of the hallways. With her lantern out, she could see room 107, just behind the bars. The depths of the hotel was now completely inaccessible to her. She reached out to her freer of her hoof and tugged on the bars, learning that they were rooted very firmly in place. "Well, someone doesn't want me to go this way, clearly." Octavia's brow furrowed at the sight. It seemed that no matter where she was going, it was going to be some kind of blockade in her way. To her left was a small stairwell that had collapsed and was no longer usable, which had only left her unexplored option. The hallway to her right that expanded further into the hotel. With her choice made for her, she made her way down to the accessible path. At the middle of her hallway, her lamp lit up a sign that was hanging from the ceiling that was pointing at two directions. To her left was a doorway that led to the pool, and to the right was a door that led to the ballroom. She then turned and walked over to the ballroom's double doors and tried to open them, but only got the same broken lock sound as before. The pool doors, in comparison, were made out of glass and had visible steel bars on the outside that prevented them from being usable. Next to the doors was a perfectly normal vending machine, pressed up against the wall, looking like it still worked. In the decaying, monster-filled world, it seemed like almost out of place. The glass window on the vending machine slowly showed that it was mostly empty, except for the single slot in the middle that contained a yellow eye-shaped gem, just like the one that she had found in her room. She had to blink at that, staring at the beautiful, ornate gemstone that was stuck in the middle of a normal vending machine and being sold for 4 bits nonetheless. Wait! Octavia's brow furrowed when she reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the bits that from the first room she had visited. 4 golden bits were displayed in front of her hoof, waiting to be used. What else am I going to use them for? She asked herself with a shrug, before sticking the coins into the machine. Each rattled inside with a satisfying click, indicating that they had been accepted. Once the last coin was in, the pressed C free on the keypad watched the machine. The gears inside of it began to whirl to life. The wire around the gemstone swirling around had pushed the item forward, could be dropped into the slot below. The gem was pushed forward towards enough to suddenly dangle from the spot in the machine, but not exactly fall down, just like the gears had died down. Seriously? Octavia then stared at the machine unamused. The gem was now just hanging there now, as if taunting her. There was only one possible solution of the times like this. She lifted her hoof and slammed it against the side of the machine. With a hard enough strike, saw the gem wiggle inside the slot. She grabbed the machine and let out a frustrated cry as she shook the machine hard. The gem inside wobbled just enough that it finally came loose and crashed down to the tray below. That was entirely too much effort. Octavia grumbled as she pushed down the open slot of the vending machine to receive her trinket. To her surprise, her hoof came back down with 2 items. One was a gemstone in question, but the other was a bottle that looked like it belonged in the vending machine. Health drink? She murmured out loud while reading the label. Of the flare text next to the bottle, whereon the words described its abilities as a painkiller, to mind fresh wounds, as if some kind of miracle drink that would fix Alesia. Octavia was certainly still and very stiff and sore from the heavy bruising that she had taken. But after she was far from drinking a random concoction, she had found a decaying vending machine. I suppose I'll hold on to this just in case. Why not? With the 2 new items fitting comfortably in her bag, she made her way down to the rest of the hallway. The hallway ended in another intersection, same as the other. To her left was another hallway blocked off with a series of metal bars. In front of her was a stairwell that looked actually usable at this time, and to her right, there were more rooms for her to check. Guess I'll finish checking the first room before I make my way upstairs. She decided to head down to the hallway at first doors. The first door she checked was room 113. Unlike most of the doors that she had checked so far, the lock wasn't busted, but neither did it open for her. But it was normally locked. She then let out a scoff of frustration as she was about to move on when realization struck her. She reached into her saddlebag and quickly pulled out their silver key that she had gotten from Pinky's room and tried it on the lock. Although the key lifted the door, but it did not turn at all. She then tried several times before giving up, in realization that the key wasn't for that particular room. It could be helpful if this key had a number room on it. Octavia glared at the key in annoyance before shuffling back to the saddlebag. Maybe I'll stumble upon the key for this door later. She then hoped that she didn't have to do a lot of backtracking in this place, because she was starting to get sinking suspicion that's what she was going to do, to be so unfortunate. Room 115 provided to be more fruitful, as it opened to first try. This room, however, was more decorated than the other rooms that had been. Balloons and streamers were scattered around the room with confetti spread around the floor and the beds. As if she had to guess, this room had once been a host to her birthday party loving sister, and never cleaned. It was a sight that brought back nostalgia. She had even and still remember sharing a room with Pinky the first time they'd come to Ponyville. Ponyville! We are really in Ponyville! Filly Pinky bounced into the hotel room in excitement. She rushed around the room in pure joy before claiming one of the two beds as her own. She reached for her little saddlebag, tossed a flurry of confetti into the air. Well, I'm glad you're excited, sis. Younger Octavia smiled, placing her own saddlebag by the bed. Just keep in mind that we're moving to a new city is a big deal, and there's a lot of needs that need to be done. Paperwork to sign, living arrangements to set up, you name it. Oh, I'm not worried about that at all. Pinky smiled brightly as she bounced on her bed. After all, I have the world's biggest, bestest sister to help me through all of it, and I just know that we're going to be so happy that we're staying together forever. Octavia hesitated, grimacing in retrospect. I don't know, Penkamania. I haven't really decided if Ponyville is where I want to live yet. Pinky's bouncing stopped as the young filly then turned to look at Octavia with wide eyes, tears starting to brim over. You don't want to live in Ponyville with me? It's not that, Octavia quickly replied, not wanting her sister to burst out into tears. It's just, I don't even know what my special talent is yet, you know? What if I'm an airship engineer, or an ethological designer, or a gemstone refiner? There's a possibility that whatever my cutie mark is, it'll take me elsewhere. I suppose that's true. Pinky lowered her head, a hoof brushing against her bed forlornly. But you're going to be around until then, aren't you? Those big blue eyes looked up at Octavia pleadingly. Oh, of course, sis. Octavia hesitantly smiled, walking up to Pinky, who gently placing her hoof against on her sister's leg. I'll always be here for you when you need me. That won't change, I promise. Pinky rushed forward and wrapped her legs around Octavia, her small body shaking as she let her tears fall. Octavia just wrapped her own hooves around her sister and held her in that delicate hug. Oh, Pinky! Octavia then muttered quietly, staring at the room nostalgically. She had remembered her trip fondly, and the room gave her a warm, welcoming feeling. She found out that she rather really liked this room. And then it was ruined by the sharp moan of mare in ecstasy, muffled through the walls, immediately followed by a moan that started vermific thumping that left a little question as to what was going on the other side. Oh, for the love of Celestia! Octavia growled in annoyance at the sounds. Honestly, how can ponies do such a thing at a time like this? It was certainly the last thing she expected to hear was a decrepit hellhole, let alone with the room that reminded her so much of her sister. The obnoxious of it all made her want to go chew the ponies out. Wait, other ponies? The realization that wasn't alone had struck her. She rushed up to the wall, separating them, slammed her hoof against it, trying to get their attention. Hello? Hello, can you hear me? The muffled mare only let out a moan in response, either to answer a question or defiance of, Hey, you have to listen to me. The town is in danger, the streets are crawling with monsters, and everyone has left. Can you stop rocking the bed for 2 seconds? It seemed like no matter how much she yelled or knocked, a couple in the other room refused to stop. Fine then, get killed by the monsters. See if I care. Octavia was fuming. She hated being ignored like that, especially when she was trying to help some pony. Those being there at least explained why room 113 had been locked at least. Without the key to the room, she had no way of getting their attention. Stupid situation, unaware imbeciles. She growled under her breath, turning back to the messy room. She just had to ignore them, as difficult as that was going to be. Stepping up to the bedside table, she found a jewel laying on top of it, yet another piece of postcard. This jewel looked much more familiar to her, as it was in the shape of one of the balloons on Pinky's cutie mark. It was of lustrous red color. It looked like even more pristine than it much had. Much like the rest of the room, just like looking at her made her think of her sister. Then she picked up the torn piece of paper to read it. Shining brightly in the night sky, waiting for the souls. Judging by the way it was torn, it was met by 2 pieces had found earlier. She had left at least one more piece of the riddle complete. The other mare let out a sharp moan, causing Octavia's eyes to twitch. She put everything away in her bag and marched out of the room, frustrated, angry, and wanted to take out on that other mare. Banging on the wall hadn't worked, so maybe banging on the doors would? She figured it might be worth a shot. Once back the empty hallway, she made her way up to room 113, lifted her hoof, and being getting ready to slam it down and give him a piece of her mind. Just as she was about to knock, her phonograph suddenly began loudly ringing. Her heart instantly fell as she swirled around frantically, trying to look around the hallway for the source of the ringing. Something dangerous was nearby, and she didn't want to stick around for it to show up. The couple were locked in the room. They'd be fine, but she needed to get to safety. Uncertain of where to run, she ran back towards the main hallway in hopes of escaping the monster. The phonograph erupted louder as she came to a screeching halt in the intersection. In the light of her lantern filtering through the metal bars blocking her path, standing just behind him was a freakishly tall stallion. His head was going as high as almost touching the ceiling. From the top of its legs, it lifted up his body, and around its neck was the thick barbed wire that looked like it was digging into the creature's furless white skin. Its two front legs had been thick metal wrapped around them, and just barely at the light of the lantern was the blood-smeared mask I'd seen outside of Pinky's window. It was the same monster back then, and it had followed her straight into this hotel. The creature even stood taller than Celestia looked, as if it was staring right at her, tilting its head over to slightly in curiosity at Octavia. Just the sight of the creature filled Octavia with panic, causing her legs to sprint away without realizing where she was going. Her hooves quickly met the stairs as she raced up to the second floor, trying to put as much distance between her and the creature as possible. The ringing of her phonograph grew quieter at the top of the stairs, giving her a moment to catch her breath. She looked back down the stairs that she climbed, trying to see if it had possibly followed her. Though now that she realized it, the creature was far too large to fit through the gasps of the bars, so she would have barely able to fit her hoof between the bars, let alone let a monster that size get through them. She simply panicked upon seeing the creature had to run on instinct. Maybe it wasn't the same monster from Sugar Cube Corner as well. Seeing that the monster was nearly tall enough to poke its head through a third-story window, she let out a sigh of relief and turned down only for the phonograph to flare back up with hysterical ringing. The sickly, squelching sound of muscles' saliva hit the air as the new monster walked into the light of her lantern. It was quickly gray abomination, as if a pony had been cut in half by large bulbous tumor that take the place upon its upper half. The skin was shriveled and clung strangely to the body that sauntered towards her, its pace slowed by the thick metal wrapped around both its legs as it drew closer. Long, sharpened tongue escaped from its mouth from the front, the appendage dripping down with thick saliva, twitching in the air, as if tasting it. Octavia then stepped back in disgust, revolted by the creature. The stairs behind her led back to the masked stallion and metal bars that blocked her path to her right. She only took the path not obstructed and ran down to the hallway to her left. The creature squelched as its head turned to follow her, its tongue slamming against the floor, immediately giving the chase. Her hooves quickly reached out for the first floor, and I came straight to the door, room 213, and prayed it would open. It let out a loud click as it opened, and she rushed inside, before slamming it shut behind her. Not a second later, the creature's tongue slammed heavily against the door, and the wood audibly cracking from the force of the impact. Octavia slammed her shoulder against the door and braced it while gritting her teeth as she prayed for it to go away. The tongue slammed against the door again, the entire structure shaking hard against the impact. She dug her hooves and held it firm, the door surviving a third strike from the powerful appendage. The third hit seemed to give the creature a pause, as she could hear its tongue slivering against the door. After a moment's pause, she heard a muffled slurp, and as if the creature had withdrawn its tongue, and the muffled heavy thuds of its footsteps walking away. She refused to move from the position bracing at the door, even after her phonograph had gone silent, until she was absolutely certain it was safe. When she finally feels safe, she did let go of the door and backed away from it, watching it to see if it would burst open suddenly. When it didn't, she turned around to look at the room that she had entered for the first time. It was very different from all the other hotels that she had entered up until this point. There wasn't a single piece of furniture in sight, or even the carpeting to speak of. It was an open room with a hardwood floor that was waiting renovated. Upon closer inspection, there were several dark stains littering the floor and walls, although for the origins were unknown. The only other thing in the room that appeared to be a hatch was the center of the room, that was tied shut with a piece of rope. "That's odd," Octavia murmured, inspecting the hatch. She pressed her hoof against the rope, noting that it was wrapped tightly on the handle, and a loop on the hardware floor. Testing the handle, that proved the door that it was not budging as long as the rope was there. It looked like this hatch would open up to room 113, although I need to find something that could cut this rope. She certainly wasn't so sure why there was a door leading up to that room, or if bothering the couple really was worth it her time at this point. She was certainly desperate not to be alone right now, and if there was other ponies in there that could suffer through the same awkwardness, it meant they could travel together. Safety in numbers and all. The room yielded against nothing of interest, so she made her way back up to the door and pressed her ear against it. She couldn't hear anything but the sound of her own breathing, so she opened the door carefully just to make sure the coast was clear. She could see the gashes on the door where the monster had struck it, but the hallway was otherwise empty. Unsure of where the danger would return, she sped up her search, she quickly finding room 218 to be the next accessible door. Upon entering 218, Octavia's nose immediately wrinkled as a foul odor filled the air. She gagged as she brought her hoof up to her face, the unmistakable scent of blood in the room. Her phonograph was silent as she stepped in further inside, the sight now matching the smell. There was blood splattered all over, almost the entire second in the bedroom in the room, looking as if someone had brutally murdered on the spot. Nobody or organs, just the remaining of Grizzly's scene. And the other bad news was in the stark contrast, made up as fresh and new, with barely a wrinkle out of place. What in the Equestria happened to this place? Each room was even worse than the last, and she couldn't make heads or tails of it all. Swallowing her nerves, she walked over to the bedside table, where all the other clues had been. Sure enough, she found what she was looking for. This time, however, she only found was a piece of a torn-off postcard. It looked like the topmost piece of the postcard, and with most of the pieces together, she could now read the full riddle. Red moon, cleanses and sinful, make them anew, shining brightly against the sky, waiting for the souls. Who will be born again tonight? Who will be born again tonight? Octavia read the lines in order, over and over in her head, not quite sure what the understanding it meant, but they had meant something. But for her life now, she couldn't really figure it out what was doing all this and getting closer to finding their sisters, or what would have happened to this town. She had no answers to her questions, so she just pocketed the last bit of the note and made her way out of the blood-soaked room. Her phonograph erupted into a roar of static ringing as a muffled screech pierced her ears. The squelch of muscle and mucus ripped through the air as if something struck inside of her body. In an instant, Octavia screamed in pain as her body was flung from the impact, her back crashing into the carpet as her body rolled into a stop. Her hooves quickly wrapped around her torso, a hissing for her teeth, and that pain was now assaulting her ribs. Her eyes shot open and she turned her head, seeing the creature licking, standing beside her on the door, its tongue flailing in the air, loudly as it screeched. Its tongue slammed hard against the floor before it began to run straight into the direction. She scrambled to her hooves, ignoring the fire now was burning in her chest as she ran, hearing the monster's tongue impact on the floor where she had been lying. The pain in her chest roared at her, just loud enough to dull the creature's cries as she put a distance between them. She finally came to a stop and hit a railing, suddenly being able to see down the first floor. She was now on the balcony that Ellie had been on earlier. The little filly had to be nearby. Octavia spun her head around, looking at the hallway that she had just come from, and seeing the creature stumbling its way towards her. It was by no means fast, but she still couldn't stand there and let it approach. She grit her teeth and sprinted away, running around the length between the railing and the other side. The licker stopped at the railing itself, let out a screech as its tongue tasted the wood, blocking its path. She stared at it, watching the licker press its head against the railing, trying to figure out what it was stopping from getting to her. It seemed that it wasn't smart to realize that there was a hole leading down to the first floor, standing between them. She thanked her blessings for that. She ran ahead. She made her another turn and found herself in a new hallway full of hotel rooms to check. Her phonograph also died down. indicating that she had put enough distance between herself and the monster that wasn't likely going to chase her anymore. Her hoof pressed against a new formerly bruise on her hips. Wincing in pain from it, the tongue was hit harder than she thought was possible, but it didn't feel like anything was broken. I've got to be more careful. She sucked in a breath as she walked forward, trying not to agitate the wound any more than needed. In this hallway on the first door it was unlocked was room 202. However, when she opened it, the door only opened partially, being stopped short by the chain lock. From the darkness within the room, she could hear a mare crying, a gentle sob as if some pony was trying to hide away from the world. Sobs were pained soul who had lost hope in the world. "Hello? Is some pony in there?" Octavia called out, hoping that this time some pony would acknowledge her. The mare in her room gave no response, only continuing to allow in her own pity, "Hey, if you can hear me, say something." She called out again desperately, just wanting some kind of response. Unfortunately, the mare just seemed intent on not giving her one, just continuing to cry, "Excuse me, but there are monsters roaming around the halls here. You need to get somewhere safe, away from this crazy place." The mare refused to answer at all, causing Octavia to let out a frustrated sigh. She closed the door, feeling her frustration. Her anger started to boil over again. Yet another pony was completely ignoring her with the situation where they needed to become together for safety. What is wrong with every pony here? It seems like the whole world is falling into insanity, and she was the only one left. Room 205 was the only other room in the hallway that opened, leading to the room that stopped Octavia, dead in her tracks. The entire room was concrete floor, walls and ceiling everywhere. 4 torches were lit in each corners of the room, and the center was a large statue of Celestia. Her wings spread out and curled up around the altar that sat beneath her muzzle. On the altar was a carcass alongside of the deceased pony, their blood having been pooled dripped down on the sides of the altar, which they had laid upon. Sweet Celestia, what happened here? She brought her hoof up to her muzzle, gagging at the rotting scent of decay in the air. She swallowed hard and stepped closer, trying to examine what had gone in this room for clues. The body of the pony that had been sacrificed was far too decayed to be identified, but if she had to guess it, it once had black hair that flowed over the edge of the back of the altar when it had been sacrificed. Its skin was now a sickly grayish green, wrinkled all over. There were obviously no wounds from what she could see, but its blood was everywhere. There was also a plague on the altar that looked like it had been stained with pony's blood that contained a tapograph. Only the all-seeing eyes of our Grand Monarch may pass a judgment on thy soul.